When you portray somebody who is not your natural who you are, it's challenging, but that challenge comes with real rewards. And my goal is to always make a difference for my audience in whatever pursuit I'm doing. My goal is to make to be a positive influence. I have a term for it too. I call it a creative luminary. My goal is to be a creative luminary because I want to enrich the lives of those who are my audience in whatever form that is, and to help them see things in a more positive light and see how they can make a bigger difference. And so when I'm playing a villain, you'd think that would be counterintuitive to that, but it's really not, because it provides the means for the protagonist to succeed.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 481 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today's episode, I have an interview with Laura Holley, a Utah-based voice actor and speculative fiction author. Her passion for storytelling began with her first stage performance at 7 years old. We talk about those early stage performances, the other creative acts that Laura does, and a lot about her acting and voice acting as well. And that's coming up later in this episode. But first, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by my affiliate link to manuscriptreport.com. Now, Manuscript Report is a platform that allows you some really awesome marketing tools to leverage for your book. The way it works is you load your manuscript in PDF format, and usually within about 20 minutes, you'll get back a detailed, comprehensive report that takes your manuscript, does some analytics on it, and provides you with valuable marketing tidbits, including keywords, tropes, themes, comparable titles and authors, including indicating how and why your book is similar to a particular author and title, and how yours is also unique. It will give you pitches and audience demographics of the kinds of people who would be interested in reading your book, as well as different pitches for the various audiences. There's usually 3 to 5 different audiences there. It also drafts some sales and marketing copy that can be very useful for you as a first draft towards either updating or creating that so important sales copy that goes with your book's listings. Now, if you use my affiliate link to Manuscript Report, which is at starkreflections.ca, or you use the code MARK10, you can get 10% off your purchase for your Manuscript Report. And you can check that out and make your marketing life so much easier over at manuscriptreport.com. And don't forget, use MARK10 at checkout to get 10% off. And now comments from recent episodes. Over at starkreflections.ca for episode 479, that episode was "The Keyboard is My Favorite Fidget Toy" with Premi Mohammed. Edwin Downward said, "I've always wondered if awards drove book sales, and Premi's experience goes a long way to backing up the anecdotal evidence I've collected over the years that it doesn't. In the same way, I've come to believe bestseller lists are actually contrived, especially in this age where most of the ebook outlets don't even get counted. For now, I'll stick with the position that any nomination for a book award will probably elicit me saying, 'What did I do wrong?'" Thank you for that comment, Edwin. So just a few things. There are some awards that actually do have a dramatic impact, particularly, I know you're a fellow Canadian, particularly here in Canada. The Giller Awards, for sure, you're looking at thousands of copies sold. But, and this is important, this is something Premi mentioned, it's usually when the award comes in conjunction with a book that is available through traditional distribution, meaning it's easily accessible and findable in bookstores. And what happens every year, of course, I have been a bookseller and did this, when the shortlist comes out for the Gillers, bookstores clamor to order them in and make sure they have a nice display of them. And then the day after the winning title, that's usually when the winning title goes, the sales go through the roof. So there's a bit of an uptake on the shortlist, but then a huge one on the winners. And I remember this bitterly because the last bookstore I managed, one of the titles was one that was handcrafted, and so the publisher, even going at full tilt, could maybe make 600 books a week. They weren't handcrafted, but they were very much like a handcrafted piece. They weren't mass produced. At the time, I owned an espresso book machine, and it was my very first attending of the Giller Awards. I was president of the Bookseller Association, and the bookstore I managed, I had an espresso book machine, meaning I could print and bind books right in the store. And I had worked with publishers who had low stock, for example, say, hey, while you're reprinting your stock, send me the file. I'll print them in my store to sell to the customers that I need, and then you can just invoice me for that. And obviously, invoice me for what you would charge. Now I'm paying for the print for that. So we negotiated something worthwhile so the publisher could still make money. So at the award, this was a shortlisted title. I remember saying to the publisher who was there, that was his first Giller Award. And we were both standing there like newbies at the Gillers because it was our first time being there. And I said, hey, oh my God, I haven't been able to get your book because, all the bookstores were clamoring to get it. And I said, this is what we could do. And I would be happy to provide stock for other bookstores in the Hamilton area, like another independent bookseller down the street, Brian Prince. I could provide them to the local Indigo and some other local indie bookstores that were in the Hamilton area. I said, I can print those for you so at least you could get the stock there. And, it'll be something where you'll make a decent amount of money and we can get those sales pumped through the system. And he declined, saying, no, it has to be handcrafted or not. And I said, well, sometimes the winners will sell 10 to 30,000 copies of the book in the week following, and you're going to lose out on a lot of sales. And lo and behold, they won. That title won. And I was sitting in the audience there, and I remember because I was still at McMaster University Bookstore. It was the last physical bookstore I had managed. And I remember thinking, now Kobo had made a deal with this publisher, and Kobo paid to have an ebook version of this book available so that it could be available to help earn the author money. And I wanted to do a very similar thing. I hadn't started working for Kobo until about a year later. But that was the clincher, is I was sitting in the audience and myself as a bookstore and so many other people I knew in the book industry. When that title won, I remember thinking, damn, none of us are going to make the sales because there were very few of these books in existence, and the few lucky bookstores that maybe even had some stock left were going to sell it, the 5-10 copies they had instantly and they'd be gone. And I remember thinking, wow, right now the only place you can get this, I could go on my phone right now and I can get this from Kobo. I'm like, aha. It was one of those moments. I know this is a long response to the comment, Edwin, but it was one of those moments where I thought, wow, there is something to be said for digital books. And lo and behold, I think it was within a year or two that Kobo hired me to come up with what I came up with, which was the Kobo Writing Life platform to help get indie author titles into Kobo. So that's a long way of explaining that sometimes bestseller lists, not bestseller lists, I should say, sometimes awards will have that impact. But I do want to comment as well, Edwin, on the bestseller list that you talk about. And I remember this when I worked, when I was a board member of BookNet Canada that tracks book sales in Canada. Kobo was the only ebook retailer willing to provide BookNet Canada with their sales data. Apple would only do it for Apple Canada if Amazon agreed to do it. And again, BookNet can't just take sales from a single source. They wanted to take their sales from numerous sources so they can actually have a better perspective. So in a nutshell, it seems like the reason there isn't a proper effective ebook sales outlet is because there is nobody, Amazon's not willing to share their data, which sucks ass. I hate the fact that they don't share their data. All these companies exist to try to read and interpret and guess, very educated guesses, but they're guessing what's actually selling. Even in my role as a consultant with Draft to Digital, I can run the bestseller list, the indie bestseller lists, and the data is only as good as the data Draft to Digital has. So if a lot of authors are publishing direct to Amazon, any of the sales from Amazon are not reported there because we don't know what they are. Any of the places where the authors go direct to the platform, D2D doesn't know. So ironically, the authors who use Draft to Digital to publish to more of the larger retailers end up higher on the top seller list. It only makes sense. If you're going direct to all the major retailers and you're only using Draft to Digital for the piddly ones where you're selling ones and twos or whatever, you're not necessarily going to get on the list. So ironically, my titles, because I do, go direct to Amazon, I go direct to Kobo, but with some of the titles that I co-author and I use the Draft Digital payment splitting, I go to all the major retailers, Amazon and Kobo and Barnes & Noble and Apple and blah, 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 through Draft to Digital. Those titles are more likely to show up when they do well because the sales data is coming from numerous sources. And so that's just an interesting thing about the ebook sales lists. And even there are, when you look at Amazon, you're only seeing not necessarily what's selling on Amazon, because books that are in Kindle Unlimited, KDP Select to get into Kindle Unlimited, the page reads manufacture a sales ranking based on factors that nobody really knows and everyone's guessing as well. So it's not really a top seller because it's based on all these factors you have no idea. I will also even admit that even in the weekly Draft to Digital bestseller lists that I create, and I do that in partnership with places like Fable. They get reported to various news outlets, etc., and working collaboratively with Bookshop for the top seller lists. The books have to be listed on those platforms in order for them to be part of a bestseller list. So if it's not listed on Fable, it doesn't get included. But also, in particular case, if I think about this last week, in the reports I had, L. Kennedy, who has a book that's been adapted into an Amazon Prime TV series, is selling remarkably well at all the retailers. And L. Kennedy is using Draft to Digital for a lot, except for Amazon Direct, is using, for Apple and Barnes & Noble and Kobo and Bookshop and all the various places. But L. Kennedy has about 8 or 9 titles that are in the top 100 titles that are being pulled in a weekly report. And I've always thought it's unfair for any single author to hog all those spaces, because if a bestseller list is meant to show you a dynamic range of titles you may want to be interested in, if 8 books from L. Kennedy's series are all on the list, you're like, well, having access to knowing that she's one of the top sellers, seeing one of her titles is enough to drive you to the whole series, and then you'll get whatever one you want to get. So what I do is a filter that I do is I'll take the top title from any author, the very top title, but I will remove any of the lower titles from that same author. That gives, for the top 25 report, that gives 25 different authors an opportunity to be on the list, rather than having 2 or 3 top-selling authors hogging the list where, 22 other authors don't even get a chance to be seen. I often think the bestseller list is partially for people who are like, oh, what should I read? What's popular? Well, here are 25 different authors that are popular right now. Not here are 4 authors that are popular right now. In any case, sorry for the long response to that comment, but thank you for the comment, because it prompted me to want to share some things I'm aware of in the industry as well as in the ebook industry. Okay, let's take a bit of a breath as I go. Comments that came via my Stark Reflections Substack. So on June 29th, 2026, I wrote an article, a post, It was further reflections from my camping trip that I talked about in episode 480. And this post was called "The Trees and I, the Rooted Yet Restless Writer." And for anyone who knows I'm into earworms, there is a beautiful song from Genesis that starts off, "The trees and I are shaken by the same wind, but thereas the trees will lose their withered leaves, but I just can't seem to let them loose." And I believe that's on one of my favorite Genesis albums, Duke. So there you go, little musical musical interlude as I share that. But anyway, that's where I was riffing on for the title of "The Trees and I." I even wrote a poem where I kind of referenced that, and I started off with "The Trees and I," but I went in a different direction because obviously I didn't want to steal from the Genesis song. But I love the idea of, the trees and me, or the trees and I. But in any case, on that article, which had a lot of comments, I'm just going to share a few, or maybe, just a couple. Janet Fix says, "Absolutely love this piece, Mark. Nature can tell us a lot about how to find the path within which one might thrive. I realize, for example, that I'm a multi-genre author, but with one platform, totally against recommendations. But it works for me. That's the path where my writer's heart finds strong roots and joy. I'm also a relaxed author, so was thrilled to read your and Joanna's book about that very thing. As for trees, I'm currently reading How to Be More Tree, which I find not only entertaining, but informative too. Thanks for sharing your heart. Onward and upward." Thank you so much for that, Janet, and thank you for adding to my already redwood tall to be read list. I've added How to Be More Tree. I really think I need to read this book, and I looked it up, and I might have already requested the audiobook, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to be going on a road trip, so more chance to read more books. I'm just finishing, or about halfway through, Richard Louv's latest, which is Noticing. Richard Louv is the guy who wrote the Nature Principle, Last Child in the Woods, and came up with the term vitamin N, which I used sort of as subtext for this article about my connecting or reconnecting with nature, and obviously comparing writers to trees. So thank you for that, Janet. And then I got a direct message from Alyssa Woodbury Jensen, who said, "Mark, your treatise on trees and their metaphorical connection to writers was thought-provoking and brilliant. I was incredibly inspired and will definitely be sharing it." And I know Alyssa lives in an area that is very nature-centric and is a very nature-centric person and writer who I admire. So I was like, wow, that is so cool that it had that impact. So thank you for that, Alyssa. And for a Substack article from last week, from June 22nd, 2026, which is called "The Long and Winding Road Back to a Typewriter." Again, stuff I've talked about on this podcast, but I wanted to reflect longer on it. Michael Campling said, "When I was a teenager, I happened to stroll into an auction viewing that was held in an abandoned cinema. I spotted an Olivetti Lattura 32 in that classic shade of blue, so I returned the next day to take part in the auction. Several bidders were interested, but I waited until the end when all but one had dropped out. After a brief bidding war, I won, and the price was just within my budget of saved pocket money. I wrote a few things on it, but I was young and didn't know how to finish anything long. I still have the typewriter, and it works, despite a few quirks. In more recent years, I've picked up a couple of others from junk shops and stalls, including another Lattura 32. I featured the typewriter in one of my mystery novels, so it influences me, I should say. It influences me that I had the wrong inflection in that, so it influences me still, although I rarely use it. Your piece has inspired me to give it another whirl. Thank you." Thank you for that story, Michael. I love that. I love hearing that. It's such a great typewriter story. I love the stories of acquisitions of typewriters, and even so cool that you got to feature it in one of your novels. That is so cool. And over for that same post on Substack, M. Cat Morales said, "First, I want to tell you how magnificently you described your new morning routine with the coffee and the typewriter on your podcast. Haha, this podcast. I could smell that coffee blending with the typewriter ink and oils. Then you added beautiful creativity of writing poems on top of it all. Wow. I started with a typewriter and a lot of handwriting. I live to feel and hear the arms swing up and smack the paper. the rhythm of the arms, of the letters, creating a unique music that needed some conscious method to it. Otherwise, they would get tangled in each other, a dance that was not so fun, the kind where two left feet trip and fall into the punch bowl. That is so beautiful and poetic, Marcia. I really, really love that. She goes on to say, my grandmother let me use her word processor when I was about 12. I was so nervous to use such high-tech equipment. It had an extra line of typing on a display that I could edit before pressing the enter button to make it type. Also says, I noticed several of the indie bookshops around Cincinnati have typewriters on display. Some have multiple. My daughter tried one and loved it. She was fascinated by the mechanics and the output. Atta girl! I love the multi-generational typewriter stuff happening in your family. And yes, like you, I remember that first electric typewriter that my parents bought me later on when I was in high school. And it was weird that I had the choice. I could have it typed directly onto the page, or I could preview it on the screen, which ended up taking me more time because I couldn't see the whole line on this little tiny screen anyway. So it was a really weird process, but it was so exciting that that was a Christmas gift that I got. And I was so excited to get it. And it came in this really cool case, like really small, like a suitcase thing. But anyways, thank you for sharing those stories. I love hearing the typewriter stories. So much fun. So if you have a typewriter story or any sort of comment that you want to leave, please go ahead and leave them at starkreflections.ca, because there is a significant crossover in some of the things I reflect on in this podcast, as well as in the articles for my Stark Reflections Substack. I will be, of course, including comments. Selected comments. The Substack comments are a lot hardier than the podcast, and I get it, because when you're listening to a podcast, it's very difficult to stop and go comment. It's not an easy thing that you can just do, because I often listen to my podcast when I'm out and about, and not all that good at using my phone machine for I'm an old guy, using the phone machine for stuff. So that's probably why I'm getting way more comments on those written articles, because you're already there and on a system where you can easily push a button and leave a comment. But thank you guys for the comments. It really means a lot, because it's a reminder that I'm not just banging on those keys and mangling them together myself, that you guys are listening and reflecting along with me and having your own awesome reflections, which I just love to absorb and learn from. So thank you guys for that. Okay, let's play a bumper and get into the final segment before we jump into the interview. Before I get into the personal update, I do want to welcome new patrons to the podcast, David Perlmutter and Suzanne Grosser. Welcome to the group of patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much, Suzanne. And thank you to everyone who supports this podcast via either the patreon.com/starkreflections, as well as my Buy Me Coffee buddies over at buymeacoffee.com/Mark Leslie. Really appreciate that support. So David, Suzanne, or anyone who is a patron of the podcast, please let me know if you've had any trouble accessing the extra content that I'm putting out for patrons. And in terms of a personal update, the first thing I want to address is I'm not sure. I tested it, and I don't think my mic is picking it up, but I have the sound of an air conditioner unit operating about 5 or 6 feet behind me, to my left slightly, or stage right. No, stage left to my right. If you were looking at me from my computer screen, I'm going to pretend you're looking at me from my computer screen. I'm on a virtual stage right now. That's what we're going to do. I hope you shouldn't be able to hear it, but anyone who's listening on headphones might be able to pick it up. Let me know if that's too annoying. I thought I would test out. I was talking to Paul Ardoin about the steady rhythmic stuff is something that in Audacity I could probably easily remove with noise removal, but when I tested it myself, I couldn't hear it in the background. So if you're hearing it, let me know, and my apologies. It is nowhere near as punchy and loud as when I'm driving in my car. I'm driving in my car. Sorry, Robin Williams doing Ed. doing Elmer Fudd singing Bruce Springsteen suddenly pumped in my head. My brain works that way. I'm sorry. What can I do? I turn on the radio. Okay, enough of that. One of the reasons you're hearing an air conditioner is because my magnificent partner, who's doing woodworking downstairs and is about to be adding way more bookshelves to my office here, which I'm so excited about, went out to Home Depot and purchased a portable air conditioner. The air conditioner in our house did die last summer, and it is so hot here right now. It is about, so downstairs, it's about 30 degrees Celsius, or if I can speak American, 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That's downstairs. Upstairs is closer to 92 to 94 Fahrenheit, or 33 to 34 degrees Celsius, and muggy. My office is above the garage. But this portable air conditioner hooked up, the window, it's on wheels, so we actually rolled it into our bedroom last night and had it running there, so it was relatively cool for us to sleep. And then this morning, late morning, once it started to get warm in my room again, we moved it back here into the office. And otherwise, I would just be sitting here sweating like crazy, and you'd be able to hear the sweat coming off me. But right now, I have it set to between 19 to 21 degrees Celsius. It's somewhere in that range. I think it's still about 24 to 26 in the room, but it's way cooler than before. And that would be just room temperature, so 69, 70 Fahrenheit as well. But that's making life so much more bearable. And yes, I could move to the basement, but I really do. I love being in this office. Liz built me this beautiful standing desk beside a sitting desk, and I alternate throughout the day between standing and sitting and working here. I love being surrounded by books. As Cicero said, a room without books is like a body without a soul. And that, I just love this place. I also love, apart from the basement room that I would be working in, which would basically be another space Liz set up for me where I actually have my storage of my stock. So there's lots of books there, but it's my stock books that I sell and pack up. That would be comfortable and cool in the basement, but there's no window. And I love being able to look out onto the neighborhood and just how magnificent. Liz and I have been doing a lot more walks together with our 13-year-old golden retriever, Indiana, and taking him out more often on nice short walks. He's actually calmed down significantly, so he's not jumping and pulling and knocking people over and stuff like that. So he's actually pleasant to walk, and he's loving the walks, but we're doing a lot more. And just, being reminded of just how wonderful our neighbors and our neighborhood happen to be. So many amazing people in this neighborhood. We're so lucky. It's those little things we have to pause and acknowledge. I also want to pause and acknowledge right now, it is Canada Day, July 1st, 2026, as I'm recording this. I'll tell you why in a second. But I think about how lucky I am, not just to all the privilege I'm inherently born with, that I'm, a middle class, middle-aged male, cisgender, heterosexual male. I have all the privilege in the world, but I have this amazing privilege that I happen to have been born in Canada. And I do love our country so much. Dad joke coming. Pardon me if I get sappy, but I do love the maple leaf. I do love this country so much of this country, which I've had an opportunity to do more exploring of, and I want to continue to do more exploring of. Just so lucky and grateful for everything that we have here in Canada, and just want to express my gratitude, my appreciation, and my love for this country and the people in this country, including all of the peoples and the Indigenous First Nation peoples and the traditions and customs and the lands that we call Canada now, that they were on for thousands of years before us settlers arrived, and acknowledge that there is a connection through the Indigenous peoples and their cultures and their ways that do help bring us closer to the land itself, to the richness of that relationship we have with the very physical world around us, as well as the spiritual that comes from that connection with nature. So acknowledging the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples who were in this area of Waterloo, Ontario for thousands of years before we arrived, and just grateful that I get to be a part of all of these things, not just this Canada that we know today, but this land and the peoples that have existed here for way longer before I was lucky enough to be walking these lands. That's a bit of a personal acknowledgement and a celebration for any Canadians listening. I know it'll be too late by the time this episode comes up, but happy Canada Day. And for, I guess, for my American friends, just a few days afterwards. Yeah, see, we do our Thanksgiving first, and then you guys do it a month later, and we do our celebration a few days before July 1st. But you know what? Happy Independence Day for the US. Let's hope it actually remains independent, but I'm not going there. I'm just gonna wish you all the best and say that I am thinking of you, and we're still really good friends, and we're still here for you regardless of what's happening that I don't want to think about right now as I think about being grateful. I did mention earlier that I wasn't going to be, why I'm recording this a little bit early is I'm heading up north. I'm going back to my old stomping grounds. I'm going to be hanging out with a couple buddies, Pete and Steve, up at Pete's house. He still lives in Levack. Actually, my very first friend, his house was 2 houses away from my house growing up when I was a kid, and he's still in his parents' old house. So Steve and I are going to sort of post Canada Day celebration to hang out, have some beers, and just goof around and listen to Rush music and all the nerdy things that we've been doing for I don't even want to count the decades. But anyways, since we were teenagers and hanging out in Pete's basement, listening to Rush music, and Steve and I pretending to be Alex and Getty from Rush, while Pete actually played along on his drums to the Rush music. But anyways, I don't think we'll be doing that, but we might be air drumming and air guitaring and all those things. And I'm sure Liz is very happy that she doesn't have to witness any of that. But one of the other things I'm doing, and this is writing related, is I have been editing. I've just finished Lake Huron edits from my publisher for the Ghost Stories of the Great Lakes book that's coming out from Woolsack and Win in October. I've secured a bunch of events in October in Waterloo, Kitchener, and Burlington, and I'm on my way up north to Sudbury, Ontario. I'm going to be stopping at a few places. I'm going to be stopping at in Parry Sound, at Point de Barrel, if I want to say it the English way, and French River, because there's some stories from the book. I want to record, on the shores of the lake or on a bridge or over top of this water, and record them so that when the book comes out, I can actually release them into social media. It's kind of like this abbreviated, 60-second from this chapter. Here's the story, blah, 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 blah. And then why not do it at those locations? But while I'm up there, I'm going to be checking with a couple bookstores to see about doing some events. In particular, I want to do one in Parry Sound because at Barely Used Books is a phenomenal bookstore I always love to visit when I'm there. It's a beautiful location. And you can see the water from there, and it'd be really cool if I could do an event really close there, because I do plan on doing a lot of promotion in as many communities close to the Great Lakes as I can on both the Canadian and the American side. I at least want to circumnavigate Lake Ontario and Lake Erie in my travels, and I'll probably do some other Lake Superior and potentially Lake Michigan locations in the probably the 6 or 7 months following my release of the book. But that's it for my really long extended personal update. It is now, we're 30 plus minutes into the podcast. I think it is time for us to roll the bumper and get on to this fantastic interview with Laura Holley. Hey, Laura, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thanks very much. I'm excited.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast, and we're going to be talking a lot about audio, and we're going to be talking about writing, and we're going to talk about theater. It began with theater for you, right? Like at the age of 7, is that right?
Yeah, I actually, yeah. So theater, I was in second grade, and I had these incredible teachers who every year we did a Shakespeare play and we did another show.
Wait, you did Shakespeare in grade two?
Yes, second grade. Second
Whoa.
grade.
That
Yep.
that's those are hard words.
Yeah, we did Romeo and Juliet, we did Midsummer Night's Dream, we did I can't remember what the third one was that we did, but they followed me my grade. It was these two team teachers and they followed us from second grade all the way to fifth grade. So I had them for 4 years
Oh wow.
and they were phenomenal. I mean, helped a ton. Now I understand Shakespeare and stuff like that because I got started at such a young age. You know, you're still learning language and stuff at that point. So
Oh my God. Do you remember that first role, that first stage
So,
role?
my first role ever was for a play called Wackadoo Zoo, and I was a zookeeper who was trying to help all of the animals learn what sounds they were supposed to be making.
Oh, that's cute.
So, because they were all making the wrong sounds, and
Yeah.
in the end, I was supposed to throw a tantrum on stage. So
Oh
that
wow.
was that was
That's
hard for
that's the
my
sound
little
the
7-year-old
zookeeper
self.
makes when she's frustrated.
That's
Okay.
right.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
What does
and
the
then
fox say? That's what I want to know.
that's
Sure.
right. Yep. Very much like that. So.
Yeah. Oh,
Anyway,
that's
and then
cute.
I did like Lady Capulet, and I was one of the fairies and in Midsummer Night's Dream and stuff like that. It was a
Oh my
lot of
God, that
fun.
is fantastic. I love that so much.
So, yep, it was a lot of fun getting started so young, and then in middle school they didn't even have an acting program, so I had to go for 3 years with nothing. And by the time I got to high school, I was just dying to jump back into it. So
Oh
I've done it ever
wow.
since. Yeah.
Is there a favorite kind of role that you've enjoyed doing on stage? Like
Villains.
comedy, drama,
I
like whatever?
I love villains. They're fun. They're challenging to do well. But just like in writing, you your protagonist can only go as far as your villain provides, or villain or antagonist provides a
Right.
barrier for them to overcome. And so that's why I like the challenge of villains because nobody's gonna love you afterwards. I just a few years ago I played the stepmother in Cinderella, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, and the kids were scared of me. That's not what you want afterwards, but it is what you want when that's your role.
Yeah, yeah, of
So
course. That
yeah,
means you nailed it, right? When you hate an actor in a movie because of the villain they play, you
yeah,
realize, wow, they're really good. I
yeah,
hate them
yeah.
like I'm
I
supposed to.
yeah, I actually had it was really funny. One of the last performances that we did, um, it was the scene where the stepmother rips the dress from that Cinderella's wearing, and I had this little girl stand up in the audience and scream, "Shut up" at me
Oh my God.
in that scene. And it took everything I had to get off stage before laughing. And I got off stage, and everybody in the back,
Yeah.
was just dying. I felt so sorry because Cinderella had to stay on stage. And I'm like, I don't know how she kept, because I,
You know
I
what?
rip it and I go off.
That little girl, that leader, who's like,
Uh-huh.
okay, enough. I'm going to say something. This is just too
Yeah.
much. You can't do this to Cinderella.
Yes, yes. I was actually really impressed with the fact that she would do. I'm sure her parents were mortified,
Yeah,
but
but I bet you that little girl's grown up to be some strong leader.
I'm sure I'm
Yeah.
sure she
Yeah,
has.
she's
I'm
not going to
sure
put
she
up
has.
with things. She's going to speak out. I love that.
Yep.
Love
Yep.
that. I remember when I was a kid seeing E.T. And I wasn't that young when it came up, but I was young enough that I was
Hmm.
still considered a child, I guess.
Yeah.
There was a much younger child in the theater that had to be taken out because when E.T. died, spoiler alert, E.T. dies, but he comes back to
Yeah.
life a few minutes later. Okay, so for anyone who
Yeah.
hasn't seen it yet, it's okay.
Yeah.
He's okay.
Yeah.
He does leave. He goes back home. He leaves Elliot, but that's sad too. But was bawling and screaming because E.T. was dead.
Yes.
And again, the movie had just
Oh.
come out, so it's not like the parents could go, "Oh, it's he's going to be fine. Just wait a second." They
Right.
actually took the poor kid out of the theater, and I wonder if he ever found out that E.T. actually came back to life a few minutes later.
Hopefully, maybe at home they got to watch it. The kid got to watch it. Oh, how funny.
But I guess that's the value in really good storytelling is when the watcher, the listener, the reader
Hmm.
can fall right into a scene and a character and it becomes real. And you experience that in different ways, right? As a writer, as a theater professional, but also as an audiobook actor, narrator. What's the term you prefer?
Narrator. So voice actor or narrator or
Okay.
someone who does voiceover, all of that. So
Cool.
yeah, I love it's been a fun experience transitioning into that because I had done so much on the acting field. You know,
Right.
I've helped with all kinds of local stuff for adjudicating and helping with plays and musicals and stuff. And then to take all of that and also the voice training for for choir and for solo singing and stuff like that, and also take that and turn that into something where I can now start doing audiobooks and doing a lot more of that kind of thing it's just so fun. It's so much fun. It's such a
Awesome.
blast to transition the things that I have already learned. And then, you know, there's mic technique and there's vocal technique and there's acting technique and then there's also audio, you know, that comes into it. All of those things come into it. So it's a lot of fun learning the new things that I needed to add to those experiences I've had. So
So many questions about adapting that, but I'm curious about, was there an inciting incident that led to you saying, "Oh, I can take these acting skills and I can transfer them into this other realm"? Like, was
for
there something that
sure.
happened where you gave it a try and went, "Whoa, this is fun"?
Yeah. So when I went to college, my goal was to be an actress. I wanted to go to LA. I wanted to do film. The school that I was going to didn't happen to have a film degree. They had a stage performance degree. But I ended up getting married and having and starting very young having children. And so it had also been a big goal of mine to be a stay-at-home mom. And so
Stay-at-home
that
mom, Hollywood actress.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
I didn't anticipate them, getting married so young, but I did. And so I was faced with a real tough choice, what I wanted to focus on. And I stayed home. I decided to stay home with my kids. And so I did a whole lot of local stuff with theater. And that was really hard for me for a while, but I decided that my career would be raising my children and doing that to the best of my ability. And I have to say I'm very proud of them. I'm really happy with how things are going,
Yeah.
but I'm by no means done. But I when COVID, so I have 5 children. When I had my last one, I turned to my husband and I'm like, "Look, when she gets to school, I want to start my own thing." And
Yeah.
that coincided just a couple years when COVID hit. It was just before she was going to start school. And I
Right.
thought, okay, well, we're all home. It's a little tricky to start something right now, but I could at least start getting trained. So I found a company called Such a Voice, and I paid for their premier VIP program, which is a voice acting program, because I had heard. Okay, I should have said this to begin with. In that process of doing all of this stage stuff, I just felt this sadness that I would not ever be able to do LA or do any of these other goals that I'd had. And then I don't remember how it came up, but my sister one day invited me to this thing at a local college that talked about voiceover, voice acting. And it had never occurred to me that I could do that from my home, which is so
Right.
funny because it had been such a long time. But it never occurred to me until then. And I went to this presentation by the company called Such a Voice. And I was just so intrigued. And so then I went home and I started researching and I researched all the different companies that there were. And turns out I felt like Such a Voice was going to be the best one for me to go with. So I started during COVID. Things got really hard and I had to take a break for a little while and then I went back to it and finished it up. But I as soon as I found out about it since then, it's just been, you know, the goal that and I've started getting started in writing too because I had never even attempted that, which is so funny because I've done so many different artistic, creative things in my life. I've done a lot of different things. Art, I've done acting, I've done music. I should have said this earlier too. I've done music since I was 5 years old.
Oh,
So
wow.
between
Okay.
music and acting,
Well, yeah, you mentioned singing, but also you play an
yes.
instrument. Okay.
Yes. So I started piano at 5. I went on to add violin to that at 12.
Oh my God.
Um, I did choirs starting with 12 at 12. I've done a lot with my churches that I've been in, various places I've lived. So I've done a lot of musical stuff. And then my sister started getting into actually creating albums. And so I did a lot of her copying and engraving, which is creating sheet music for
Mhm.
her. So I had a lot of other things that I had done. I also was a gymnast, so there's some artistic creative stuff in there.
Yeah.
So like to start taking all of these different elements and putting them together into something that I could do at home and something that I could do and have my own schedule with my kids has just been it's dreamy. I love it.
That is
So,
fantastic.
yeah.
It's like the best of all worlds, right?
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
So
So,
I want to dig into something you had mentioned earlier about playing a villain on stage. I imagine when you're doing narration, when you're doing the voice acting, that when you get to personify the various characters, are the villains fun to do?
they're so much fun to do. And here's why. I don't consider myself a mean person, right? I would never do the things that the villains do. And so sometimes it's fun when you're doing a lighthearted caricature kind of villain because you can really go to town with it. You can have a fun, fun voice and fun mannerisms and everything. You can put all of that in there. But when you're doing a more serious kind of villain, that can be both challenging and rewarding because, sorry to go back to the Cinderella that I recently did. I really felt like that needed to be as strong and as real as possible. So because we all know the story of Cinderella. We all know what the, plot points are of that story.
Yeah,
And so for the audience to go home and feel like they had received something from that show that was different than what they've seen their entire lives was important to me. And I felt like the best way to do that was to deliver something that they could relate to. And unfortunately, a lot of us see villains in our own lives, right? We see people who treat people very badly. There's a lot of gaslighting. There's a lot of, there's those things that are very real in our society. And so I tried to bring those things into this role so that people would go home and see what Cinderella had really overcome and relate to her in a new way that was more modern, that was not this, 1950s sweet story, but something
right.
that
Yeah,
related to now. And that was one of the most rewarding roles I've ever had, simply because afterwards people did have that response to it. But it also was really challenging for me. I'd go on stage and I'd perform this really terribly evil woman. And I was terrified that even the cast were going to think that's who I really was.
yeah,
So when I went off stage, I made sure to really befriend the people in the cast,
yeah, yeah,
and that made a big difference. And having Cinderella, the person who played Cinderella, the first time we did actually that scene in rehearsals, I brought it. I brought all of what I had been preparing. And afterwards, she was scared. I could sense that she was like, "Oh my gosh, who am I doing this with?" And I looked at her. I'm like, "I promise that is not me. Can I please give you a hug?" And she gave me a hug, and it was fine after that. But those are when you portray somebody who is not your natural who you are, it's challenging, but that challenge comes with real rewards. And my goal is to always make a difference for my audience in whatever pursuit I'm doing. My goal is to make to be a positive influence. In fact, in your interview with you just recently interviewed her. It was she has an Irish name.
Oh, Orna Ross?
Yes, Orna Ross.
Yeah,
She mentioned that she she calls it creatives or creativists, I think was what she said.
yeah, yeah,
And it's people who bring their creativity to everything they do, not just whatever
yeah.
work they're doing or
Creative
whatever it is.
catalyst? I think those are
Yeah, yes.
yeah, I love
Yes.
that. Yeah.
So, and I have a term for it too. I call it a creative luminary. My goal is to
Oh, I
be a
love that
creative
term.
luminary.
Oh my
So,
God. Wow, I love that.
yeah. So, because I want to enrich the lives of those who are my audience in whatever form that is, and to help them see things in a more positive light and see how they can make a bigger difference. And so when I'm playing a villain, you'd think that that would be counterintuitive to that, but it's really not because it
Yeah.
provides the means for the protagonist to succeed. So,
Yeah. I love that. So when you're so there's got to be a difference between the stage acting and then performing for an audio only, right?
yeah.
Because with stage, you have the visual, you have the movements, the
Mm-hmm.
stage direction, and all of the things going on top of the voice. But
Right.
then all of it has to be in the voice. How does one transfer those skills?
Okay. So for me, I think it's probably different for different people. For me, my imagination has to actually fill in the room. I have to picture where I am, where things are located in the room, what's going on in the room. For example, in a book that I'm doing right now, there's an empty warehouse. Well, my sound is going to carry slightly differently in an empty warehouse, and she's all by herself, the character who's there, versus at a different point in the book when she's in kind of a coffee shop and there's a whole bunch of other people there and it's a very warm, calming, environment. So so you picture it, at least I picture it first. After I have pictured it, then I imagine what I'm interacting with, where I'm looking, just like I would on a stage. And as far as mannerisms go, you never sit in front of a mic and just sit there. You have to still have mannerisms. You're still going to move. You're still going to direct your mental focus towards wherever that person is in the room, which is which is the same in acting. You're going to spot a spot. You're trained when you're young. Pick a spot on the wall. That's where that character is that you're talking to if you're doing a monologue or something.
Right, yeah.
Same idea. You're going to figure out where that person is, what they're doing, and then deliver it. And the tricky part then is to immediately, in an audiobook especially, you have to play both roles. So
Yes.
you're going from the one role to now flipping in your head, which I visualize just like a camera in a film,
Right.
being inside the other person. So, and there are some times when I have to do a like a different accent, or when it's a very different voice from the other one. Sometimes I will do those lines separately and
Oh,
plug them
really?
in and see how they do. Most of the
Okay.
time I don't do it that way, but
Yeah.
occasionally I do.
Well, because I can imagine in a really tense scene, you're doing one character, one voice, one accent, one mannerism, or whatever it is, and then flipping dialogue immediately to the other one. It almost feels like doing that as I used to learn my lines by having a recording and practicing with a recording so I could hear my cues, right? It's not just
Mhm.
enough to read the lines, it's enough to hear
Right.
the cues. So playing off of a second track where you've got the one voice and then you're
Mhm.
reacting to yourself is like because
Yes.
it almost feels like that would be a lot easier in a lot of cases.
Yeah, it helps me, but it can make editing and mastering kind of a nightmare
Oh
if you
yeah.
do too much of that.
Yeah.
Especially if you do them on different days, or if you do them because
Oh, room
your
sound's going to be different, right? Yeah.
room sound sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm lucky because my location is always pretty close to the same.
Right.
But for me, it's physicality, it's energy, it's placement in
Right.
my body where I'm placing that voice. Those things, sometimes there will be subtle differences, and when you go back to try to piece all of that together, I just recently I had one of the scenes that I had done a completely different day, and then I had a 2 week trip that I had to go on, and then I came back and I was supposed to do the very next scene, and it was so obvious that they were different days. So when I went
Right.
into editing, I had to re-record some of that and
Yeah.
try to fit the tone, and then bleed it in, kind of,
Yeah.
like just like in music, you kind of do your
Yeah.
uh anyway. So
that is so intriguing. I'm curious when you're performing these roles, do you sit, do you stand, do you alternate depending on who the character is, depending on the energy you need?
Yes, exactly. So for me, most of the time I'm sitting. There are some characters I can't do sitting.
Okay.
Um, for example, if I'm trying to get a really low, gruff kind of sound for something like a troll, that's gonna probably require me to stand. But most of the time I can do most of my characters sitting, depending on what's going on. For example, if somebody is running down a hill, that is definitely a standing moment for me
Okay.
because I have to, I have to get their cadence really, really well done. And that can be tricky if you're sitting.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll
I
use a stool too, because that gets you upright if
I'll
I'm doing
get you
a
up.
long
Up.
time.
Okay. All right. Propped, sitting differently, prop differently, probably
Hmm.
changes your diaphragm and everything as
Yeah.
well.
Yep.
Uh, I guess I'm always curious about dialogue when somebody's eating. Is it real food? Is it pretend
Uh-huh.
nosh?
So uh, I haven't done a whole lot with eating, but I have watched a lot and learned a lot about eating. And most of the time, my understanding is that you're going to eat. And you are going to, there's somebody that I follow on socials who does animal impressions. So he has these videos of animals and he gives them voices. And sometimes they go underwater. And so he will literally have a bowl full of water and stick his face in it and have his mic next to that and make noises through the
I love
so
that.
yeah, it's a lot of fun trying to come up with how you're gonna make
Yeah.
certain sounds
It's
and
that
things.
method sound acting.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So
So
I'm curious. So you get a manuscript from somebody that you're working with, from an author, from a publisher, from whatever. Do you do a read through and then do you like how do you determine the voice that you're going to do for different characters and even the narrator?
okay, so for me, the narrator is going to be something I have to do long term. So typically, my narrator voice is going to be as close to my own voice as I feel like is appropriate for whoever that narrator is. So if that's the main character, if that whatever it is, that's going to need to be something I can come right back to very easily, very quickly. Other than that, I will read the whole manuscript, read the whole thing. Um, take note. I ask my authors to give me a character kind of analysis sheet that just gives me a basic idea of who they are, if they want any accents done for that, if they have any background or any. I tell them I need to know if there's going to be a twist in the end, or if there's something in a subsequent book that's going to have a twist. I'd like to know those things ahead of time so that I can prepare a voice that's going to be able to do that transition
Right.
later on. But yeah, and then I kind of go through and I think about, you know, placement in if it's going to be a child, that's going to be a little bit more nasally and up here. You're talking at the top of your head, and they talk a little more clearly in some ways, and not, in other ways not. And if you're doing, I get asked all the time. I am female. If I want to voice a male, how do I do that? And typically speaking, obviously there are exceptions to every rule, but typically speaking, men's voices are not that much lower than women's voices. So the initial thing everybody always says is you just go really low and all of a sudden you're talking like a man. But that can be so caricature-esque. So what you actually want to do is change more mannerisms, more placement, than just making it low versus high. That's only one of the tools in your toolkit. One of the biggest things that I was taught when I was going through this program was a man's voice typically uses less air than a woman's voice. So women have a little bit more air that comes through their physicality when they're talking, whereas men a lot of times have less. So that's a tool that I use to
Wow.
try to help portray more of a man than
Even
a woman.
someone who's a big windbag.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and if you have something like that, then that's one of those exceptions where it's going to be kind of okay. Am I going to make him more nasally but still have more of the air going
Right,
through?
right.
But
Oh,
yes,
that's
if you're
interesting.
yeah, yeah. So anyway,
And ideally, if the author's done a good job, the dialogue that they've chosen, I say this being a big fan of Jeff Elkins, the dialogue doctor, the dialogue that they've chosen is very appropriate for their character. So how they're speaking is almost right there in front of you. You can see
yes,
it in the words, right?
yes, and that helps you make the choices for those characters.
Yeah,
Um, if when you're stage acting, so much of your performance is done through your physicality. Um,
yeah,
your does the person walk with their shoulders forward, their hips forward, their knees forward? Do they walk perfectly straight, or do they favor one side? Not full limp, but just favor one side.
right.
Do they give a half smile in between all of their sentences? Those things apply when you're doing audio as well. And
Yeah.
it's a little harder if you're sitting. So that's when I have a character who is going to have a lot of physicality, that's another example of when I would stand.
Okay.
But yeah, those you want to bring in all the different techniques you can to help you give a real performance when you're doing audio. So,
Cool. What advice would you give to writers who are looking to hire a voice actor to do audio? Like things or maybe things you wish authors knew.
yeah. So recently I was on a panel at a local conference, and I had somebody come up to me afterwards. It was about actually making your own audiobooks and whether or not that's a good idea and how to go about it.
Right.
And I had somebody come up to me afterwards, and he said, "Why do all audiobook narrators speak so slowly? Are they just trying to get more money by stretching it out so that you have to pay them more?" And I said, "No, I want you," and I was like, "I want you to think about it this way. An audiobook narrator is not reading a book. An audiobook narrator is performing a book. And so not only are they reading the words that are coming out of their mouth, they have to be like a sentence ahead to know what's coming so that they can lead that sentence into the next one. And when you're thinking about that, plus your physicality, plus your voicing of the different people, plus what's going to happen later in the book that you might be foreshadowing through your voice, all of those things and trying to create that environment requires the time. It requires you to speak slowly enough, clearly enough. You have to have enough uh, dictation in there for people to understand your words. Those things take time. And so it's funny. When I first got started doing this, I would get so offended that my husband would listen to audiobooks at two speed, 1.5 speed or two speed. I'm like, you're missing the whole performance. But over time I've gotten to where even I will do that some because it does make it so you can absorb it faster. And I can hear some of those nuances anyway.
You
But it
you
really,
can at speed and a half. I know you can still pick up on those
yes.
nuances nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's about as fast as I'll ever go because I want to hear all of that. So, as far as advice for writers when they're trying to find an audiobook narrator, definitely listen for the acting experience, the acting ability. I'm very blessed to be coming at this from an acting perspective because I know it's really hard for a lot of audiobook narrators when they first get started. They want to just read the book. And then it's very difficult when they do want to do character voices or accents because they'll overdo. They'll
Yeah.
they'll struggle with that. So definitely getting some samples, finding out what kinds of experience the audiobook narrator has, what kind of background they have, making sure that they know the acting. And then also something a lot of people don't think about is are you go is the actor going to do the uh editing and processing and mastering, or is that going to be hired out separately? Because that is something that is not always the same depending on the narrator. So you also need to ask those questions of
Right.
where does your work end and where does my work continue? So
Yeah. That's a very, very important. Thank you. How has How has this, you said you've gotten into writing or back into writing. How has the work that you do as, I guess, a stage actor and as a voice actor, how does that work inform your own writing?
Okay. So I love this question because there are so many things. If you look at creativity in general, and I'm not even just talking artistic creativity, this can apply to parenting. This can apply to technology. This can apply to a lot of different things, which is where I loved that creative catalyst concept. When you are um, now I forgot the question. I just derailed myself. Ask me the question one more time, if that's okay.
It is how acting informs your writing.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So, when you have that concept of bringing creativity to whatever you do, you start to see these ties between all of these different creative outlets. And I love thinking in terms of theme or composition, or in terms of like even textures or lighting or character development. Those things apply whether you're doing theater or writing, or even if you're doing, like for me, parenting. I'm definitely thinking about character development with my children, right?
Yeah.
Or composition or texture of a musical piece versus a book that I'm writing, or a short story, which is what I focus on primarily. So you're tying in all of these different components, and we even use the same words for them. So when I think of my voice acting or my acting in general, and I try to bring that into a book, I'm going to think about what is my voicing for this book in written form. How am I bringing in dynamic range like I have in music or in audio? How am I bringing that dynamic range into a book that somebody has to think in their head? And that's pacing, right? That's going to be your how long are your sentences? What words and adjectives are you using in those sentences? How are you developing the storyline, and how quickly or or how long it takes for a character to develop into whatever you need them to be at the end. So all of those things kind of come into play, and I love pulling it from all these other pursuits I've done to see those parallels and recognize, in my real life, this is how long it took for me to learn this thing. How can I bring that to my character, perhaps in a shorter period of time, so it fits into the book? That kind of a thing. So,
Very cool. Thank you.
yeah, yeah, it's a lot of
So,
fun.
for anyone listening who says, "Oh, wow, I'd love to work with Laura," do you have availability, or is it like, "Oh, no, no, it's a 6 month waiting period
Oh
to
no,
book
so
you in"?
I'm just transitioning into narration. So I actually am right at the beginning of that. So I do have some availability. I do have some things lined up, but
Currently.
right. Yeah, that's true. That's
Yeah,
true. So um but yeah, I'm actively looking right now, trying to fit in a real good portfolio so I can start, more
cool.
full time.
Awesome. So
So
where can people find you online if they're interested in working with you, hiring you?
So my website is lauraholley.com. That's where I send people first. And I have a lot of samples on there. You can listen to different kinds of characters and different kinds of books and things that I've done. You can also listen, or you can also go to I have a Facebook page, just lauraholley.com, on Facebook, Laura Holley. Or you can go to Instagram. It's by Laura Holley on Instagram. So
Ah,
any
of
of those
course.
places is a good place to reach me.
Are there books out right now that people might be able to check out that you've
Not
narrated?
yet. I'm
Not
just
yet. Oh, I
barely
bet you by
starting
the time
some.
this goes live, there
Yeah,
will be.
probably,
Okay, so
probably.
you'll let me
So
know so I can add them to the
absolutely.
post-interview notes.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
Laura, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun for me too. Thank you so much, Mark.
All right, so just a few reflections because I did ramble along quite a bit before we got to the interview. Is I love that Laura mentions that an audiobook narrator isn't just reading your book, they're acting it, they're performing it. And there's something magical in hearing the right professional narrator reading the right story. I have had the privilege of getting to work with so many great narrators that I've met in different ways over the years. Even when I think about my collection, One Hand Screaming, I love the fact that I think there's 4 or 5 different narrators for the various stories. I love the way different people interpret them. Now, after meeting Laura, and then we met in person, I was in LA for the Writers of the Future Gala in April this year. And we were talking, we got on talking and chatting, and some of the stories she was sharing about her path into the creative world was just so fascinating. So I'm like, oh, I got to interview you. So, after doing this interview with her, I hired her to do some short stories for this anthology project. I'd had this on the back burner for several years. When initially I had, again, multiple narrators, and a few of the initial female narrators I had lined up, it didn't end up working out schedule-wise between what I was looking for and what they had available and stuff. So I ended up having to drop that project and leaving it almost incomplete. So when I found like, oh, Laura might be able to do these stories, that'd be perfect. So I have her doing a few of them. I love the samples she provided. So I'm so excited to get the final results because I really enjoyed, the voice sample she has. And if you're looking for a narrator, go check her out. Go check out her website. Probably definitely worthwhile exploring. And the other reflection is when Laura was talking about taking various stances, etc., when performing different characters in audiobooks and thinking about, okay, I was in the warehouse and I'm facing here and like all of this stuff she's doing physical, which I'm doing right now as I'm gesturing madly in the air. But I remember that this brought me right back, I don't know why, to doing something very similar when I was early writing, when I was still a teenager, in my bedroom, in my home in Levac, not far from where I'm going to be this weekend, when I was writing on a typewriter, on an Underwood typewriter, this epic fantasy adventure novel based on my Dungeons and Dragons experiences and, riffing on Conan the Barbarian comic books and the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, etc. And there was a scene I remember very distinctly because it was one of the first scenes where I had a lot of characters kind of meeting together. And so I introduced this stream of characters all talking in the room. And this was like early time that I realized I had to do something distinctive with the way they spoke based on their characters and the mannerisms and how they moved about and how they interacted with one another. And for me, to properly capture the various characters, their mannerisms, their patterns of speech, if they were standing or sitting or who they were facing, whatever. I remember in my small bedroom actually first acting out their words and their actions while walking around in my bedroom. Like one of them was a character who was using a knife to peel slices off of an apple that they grabbed from the table when they first came into the room. It was like a big giant, hunter kind of knife, not just a small knife, and just eating the apple and crunching the apple. And so there I am actually with an apple and not a big giant knife, but my what do you call it? A jackknife that I had, just using my jackknife and eating off the blade and stuff like that. And having the dialogue and then like doing all that for each character in turn before sitting down to write each character's actual descriptions and dialogues. So I don't know why, but it was so fascinating that when Laura talked about that, I was thinking, wow, this is something she does as a voice actor to get into the characters and understand their logistical operations in space and time in order to capture that in audio. And I remember going, yeah, even just to capture that in the characters in the first page, I remember actually having to do that. Now, as I'm more sophisticated as a writer, I don't jump around the room and act out everything that happens. It's really, really hard to act out turning into a wolf, like in my Canadian Werewolf series. But I don't actually act everything out. I do sometimes speak some things out just so I can hear how it might sound coming from a character. But, a lot of that stays in my imagination. But I'm still doing that in my head. I'm moving these characters in the same way in my head. I'm just not going, oh, I need to go get an apple and a knife and slice this up and talk about, and what's the sound of, how do I sound differently when I'm, eating the apple, which I guess in an audiobook, maybe that's an additional sound that gets added, or churring and stuff like that. But I'm not a good actor. Laura is. And again, just a reminder to check her out at lauraholley.com. But that's it for my reflections. That is it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Laura. If you did, love to hear comments and thoughts, your own reflections at starkreflections.ca. If you like this episode, please feel free to share it with someone that you think would find value in it. That not only is beneficial to myself and Laura, but it's beneficial to you for just being a kind, generous person, sharing something awesome with someone else. And of course, it's going to benefit the person that you share it with. We all win. Woo! You can also leave a review for this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I really would love that. It would encourage that because, as you know, reviews actually help other people discover cool things like your books and stuff like that. But thank you so much for listening. As I said, this is the end of this episode. So until next week and until next episode, this is, as always, Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.
Summerfud sings Bruce Springsteen. I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio. I pull you a little closer. You say no. You say you don't like it. I say you're a liar. But when we get, it's like fireworks.